I had a comment on my TikTok actually just a couple of days ago about how to change your mindset when it comes to taking things personally, how to avoid taking things personally, how to train your mind to stop taking things personally. And I can definitely see why so many people, including myself, like I really wish I had this knowledge that I'm about to share when I was younger, because I really would have just stopped overthinking. I would have been happier. I would have literally been able to get on with my own shit and not get distracted by what other people thought and taking things personally and, you know, thinking that the way that people behaved had got anything to do with me. And I want to talk about how I've overcome this, how I've personally been able to liberate myself from the shackles that are taking things personally and worrying about, you know, why people do this and why people treat me like this. And I'm going to get straight into it. And honestly, the first big thing I would say is you have to develop trust for yourself. Because when you trust yourself and when you are so sure of yourself and how you behave and how you choose to kind of go about life, that being with good intentions, that is a very stable ground. And so therefore, when you have that self-trust and that understanding of yourself, you are less susceptible to being shaken by anybody putting that into question, whether that be treating you like shit, saying things about you that aren't true or are unkind, you know, not thinking to yourself, oh, well, the reason they're treating me like this is because of me. I think as a recovering people pleaser as well, we are literally conditioned to believe that things are in our control, or at least we need to adapt our behavior to try and reduce the emotional instability of a particular situation. So we are basically conditioned to think that if there's a problem, we are usually the problem, and that therefore if we're the problem, we can fix the situation, we can calm the situation down, we can keep the levels of emotion and emotional dysfunction at a low. Bringing this into adult life, we tend to think that everything is about us. We intend to internalize the way that people behave, thinking that we can somehow alter their behavior by being nicer, and that if we're just a bit nicer, then they will treat us better. Or we're conditioned to believe that, you know, if somebody treats us badly or says something unkind, that therefore that must be true, that must be the case, because we don't have a very solid sense of self, because we have constantly been molding towards other people and trying to, you know, change ourselves to be pleasing and palatable for other people. We have lost our sense of self amongst that, and therefore we have a very sort of shaky ground in terms of our own self-esteem and our own self-worth and self-trust, and therefore people can knock it easily. So when you hear an unkind comment, when you hear somebody say something not very nice, it really bothers you as a people pleaser, because you're thinking, wait a minute, is that true? Have I not noticed something about myself? Am I actually a bad person for doing that? Do I deserve to be treated like shit? And I think when you start to recover, and that part of that recovery process is learning to trust yourself, when you start to develop trust in yourself, and by the way, that's in tandem with self-awareness and awareness of like your own strengths, your own weaknesses, your own toxic traits, your own beautiful traits, and really being able to therefore utilize that to then assess when somebody does say something unkind, when somebody does make you feel like shit or attempts to, you can, from a more objective place, be able to assess whether or not what that person's saying is, first of all, true, applicable to you, or really just a reflection of them. Because when we trust ourselves, we have more faith in our behavior. We have more faith in our decisions. And part of that trust is actually not seeing things as objectively right and objectively wrong, but rather being like, this is my truth, this is what works for me, and that is good enough, that is fine enough. I definitely have this thing as part of my recovery process where I think that I should act in a certain way or handle conflict in a certain way, otherwise I'm wrong. And that's because of the repeated experience I've had whereby I've stood up for myself and people have blamed my reaction. Oh, well, you shouldn't have done it in this way. Oh, well, you should have done it like that. Oh, I don't like the way that you've responded. I'm getting annoyed with your reaction. So I've been conditioned to think my behavior and the way that I respond to certain things is kind of wrong. Because again, on top of that, as a recovering people pleaser, I trust other people more than I trust myself. And so when somebody else says, oh, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that, you should have done it differently, I'm then questioning myself thinking, Did I do the right thing? Was I behaving unfairly? And what I've realized over having to practice trusting myself is in those situations, there's no right or wrong. There's no perfect way of dealing with conflict. Obviously, you know, ideally we don't want to be hurtful, you know, mean-spirited or anything like that. But if you come to conflict resolution or, you know, in raising an issue with somebody with good intentions and with the aim of, you know, preserving the friendship, the relationship, whatever it might be, that's all you can do. There's no better way of doing it than another when those are your intentions. Building that self-trust by basically standing up for yourself is going to help you stop taking things so personally, because when you have this just undying, solid, robust self-trust, you're not going to internalize, first of all, the way people behave towards you, but also other people's opinions of you, because you know yourself well and you know what your intentions are. So if somebody were to literally say something like, you're so unkind, well, okay, but if your version of unkindness is just me raising an issue with you, then it's not because I'm being unkind, it's just because you don't like the fact that I'm raising an issue with you, or I'm putting into question your behavior. That's not because you're unkind. And people who are, you know, really trusting of themselves know that it's not a case of, oh, I was being unkind, but rather that person probably feels hurt that something's been brought up, that an issue has been raised, and it's fucking with their ego. So I think when you know yourself really well and you have that self-awareness as part of the self-trust, you don't take things personally, because you have developed that self-awareness to be able to, you know, fairly assess, right, is what this person is saying true about me? Is there evidence for this? You know, think about my past behavior, think about the way I handle this situation. Would that be considered kind? And when you've kind of done that assessment, you can think, right, well, this person, what they're saying, it doesn't really have much truth to it. When you don't trust yourself, you can't accurately assess whether or not what somebody else is saying is true or fair, because you have no trust in your own decisions, your own behavior, and your own kind of choices, which is a really dangerous place to be in, because that means that anybody can influence you very easily. That means that somebody could say something and you'll just take it on as truth when it might not be the case. I think about this concept that my therapist introduced me to, and it's called transactional analysis. Some of you would have heard of it. And it's basically this concept of, like, you know, the parent and the child relationship. And it doesn't have to literally actually be, you know, a parent and a child, but it's like, say if you're with a partner and they're telling you off, that's kind of like them in the parent and you in the child. And then obviously you can put somebody else in child, or you can become the parent. Then there's this neutral place, which is adult. And one of the things that I learned about with the adult, when you're a people pleaser, you tend to put yourself in child because you feel inferior, you kind of trust adults or trust your parent above yourself, and you look to them for guidance. And so therefore, you know, say if somebody insults you or says something critical or says something unkind, you're more open to believing that parent figure, because you don't have that much trust for yourself because you're inferior, you're the child. Whereas when you're an adult, you're in this place of like, okay, somebody said something critical, somebody said something about me, but I'm going to, look at myself internally, look inwards and think, is this true? Is this fair? Is this something that has been like, you know, you basically analyze that statement and look at it from a more objective place if you can, and, you know, dismiss it if it doesn't apply to you. And then also, if you want to, internalize it or take it on board if you feel like that's actually something that you do need to work on or you do need to work towards. Unfortunately, when we're people pleasers, we put ourselves, like I said, in that child position. So we're constantly opening ourselves up and leaving ourselves vulnerable to taking on other people's perception of us, taking on other people's view of us, and taking it on as our own beliefs, because we don't trust ourselves, we don't think highly of ourselves, so surely the other person is right, what they're saying is true. And so that's why developing a self-awareness and also self-trust is so crucial, because it barricades you from internalizing things that do not apply to you. Now, actually doing this is really hard. It's something that you have to practice, and not taking things personally comes with a lot of grit. There's two things that I want to mention with this. The first thing that I want to mention, why it's not about you, why things aren't personal. But the second thing is I want to explain how you're going to overcome it. And so that's a really important part as well. People do not behave in accordance with you, but rather in accordance with their own inner workings, their own inner world, and what's going on with them. And I recently had a comment on my TikTok, and it said, but this isn't true, because I've had experiences where they've treated me really badly, but then treated everybody else well. So if this was true, wouldn't they treat everybody badly? Unfortunately, when you are a high vibrational person, when you have a lot to give, when you are magnetic, when you are attractive, there's a lot of things going for you and you're happy and content, you're going to trigger a lot of people. And those people might treat you like shit because you are reminding them of something they feel insecure about. You're reminding them of something that they feel like shit about, something that you possess that they maybe are jealous of or they wish that they had. That doesn't mean that it's got anything to do with you. That doesn't mean that, you know, the way people treat you is a reflection of you. It is a reflection of them. You are reflecting back to them who they are. And if they don't want to see who they are, which is maybe insecure, feeling a lack or inadequate in some way, they're going to take that out on you because you're the catalyst. You're the one bringing it to light and they don't want to fucking see it. So you're going to get the bare brunt of it, which is such a travesty because it convinces that person, especially if they're young, that they're the problem, when really they're not. They're just unfortunately reflecting back to somebody what they're not. So just remember, even just from that part, it's not about you. And really understanding that and really understanding that people mostly just project is so crucial because it gets you out of your own way. You stop agonizing so much about, was this about me? Was this, you know, something to do with what I did? If you literally cannot think off the top of your head something that you have done wrong or something that you might have done that's hurtful, then it's not about you. That's like the crux of it. I do this. I'm like racking my brain, like, what is it? Why are they treating me like this? Like, what do you think I've done wrong for them to behave in this way? And that is just not what I should be focusing on. You know, if I can't think of it immediately, like, oh shit, you know, I said something a bit insensitive the other day. If I can't think of the reason why immediately, then it's not because of me. It'd be something to do with their own inner world and something to do with what's going on with them. And this is true. I recently had an experience where I was talking to a friend and, you know, I thought that I'd done something wrong. You know, I was worried that there was like a bit of a rift between us, and they explained that there was things going on in their lives that were, you know, consuming them. And I was like, oh my God, Hattie, look, here's a clear example of the fact that it's not about you. Why are you thinking that everything's about you? And I think, again, through the conditioning of being a people pleaser, your kind of default is to think that everything's about you and that you're the problem, because that's what you've been conditioned to believe, that you first will have control over, but also that you are the problem when actually you're not. It's a really hard hole to get out of. But just know that most people are operating from their own lens, their own experience of life, which is completely different from yours. It will be their own perception of how they view you, not you as you are. All their experiences and all their influences squashed together, and then everything being seen through that's going to be completely distorted, essentially. Not that anybody's view is distorted, everybody has their own view of reality, but there is a distortion going on, and that does not represent you. Hurt people hurt people. And that's such a fantastic phrase. People who are hurting may not know how to deal with their emotions. So the best way they can deal with those emotions is to hurt other people, because they cannot stop that from bleeding onto others. They don't have that kind of skill. So just know that if anybody makes unkind comments, if they're critical, if they are hurt, you know, being negative towards you in some way, or even positive, it's a reflection of them. It's a reflection of their inner world. If somebody's treating you really well and they're kind and compassionate and everything, that's a reflection of their own inner world. They have a loving place inside and they're projecting that out. You know, projection isn't always negative. It can be beautifully positive as well. But obviously in this situation, not taking things personally, it's so important to know that the way people behave is 99% to do with them, and nothing to do with you. And I know it's all good and well knowing this, it's all good and well me saying this, but putting into practice is a completely different ballgame. Putting this knowledge into practice is the hard part, and it requires you showing up for yourself even when it's hard. And this is so important across so many different things, but being able to choose yourself when it is really hard to choose yourself is what is going to develop a trust for yourself. So for example, in the past year, I've ended a few friendships with people. I've been in a friendship for 5 years, and I'd constantly, for that 5 years, been questioning my reality, been thinking, does this person like me? Does this person not like me? You know, constantly being confused by their behaviour, because one minute they'd be sound and the next minute they treat me with disdain, and I was worthless and that I was always wrong. So the ultimate test of my trust for myself would be to tell that person that what they've done is hurtful and to stand my ground. Because when you stand your ground, even in the face of people questioning you, even in the face of people getting annoyed with your reaction, even in the face of people gaslighting your experience and attempting to gaslight you, attempting to minimize your experience, and still choosing yourself even when it's uncomfortable and even when you don't want to in the moment and when you feel like you're weak in the moment, is what is going to build your self-trust. Because once you've done the first one, it gets easier every time, to the point where your self-trust is so solid that, you know, people can question your reaction, people can try and minimize and attempt to gaslight you, and you're just going to be like, nope, I know my experience, I know what I have to encounter, and that is valid. And when you develop that self-trust, then you're able to look back and think, you know, the way that they behaved towards me wasn't really about me. It was really just it wasn't them actually thinking that my experience was wrong, actually thinking that I was being ridiculous, actually thinking that I was being over the top or overreacting or lying or anything like that. Really, it was just an attempt by them to self-soothe, to protect their own ego. When you realise that those techniques that people kind of employ, such as minimizing, gaslighting, etc., is really about self-soothing and nothing to do with actually you being over the top, being, you know, rude, being unfair, being ungrateful, whatever it is they might accuse you of, it is so liberating, because it's really just them trying to self-soothe. Being able to have this self-trust works wonders for your self-esteem and therefore your ability to not take things personally, because anything that anybody could possibly say goes through your self-trust, high self-esteem filter. And if it doesn't make it through, that means it's not worth paying any mind. And I think it's really important to say that, you know, it's important to have self-awareness of your own toxic traits. And sometimes people will, you know, this is not a blanket statement. Sometimes good friends will come to you with honesty and kindness, raise an issue with you, and you will also have to have the ability to take that on board for your future growth. But being able to be robust enough and develop a robust enough sense of whether or not it is a fair take or accurate in accordance to, you know, what you know about yourself is really important. Your brain gets to a point where you immediately just see things as, that's just a reflection of them. I've had several hate comments or troll comments on my social media, apart from the constructive criticism, which I do really appreciate. A lot of people who just leave troll comments, it's really just, I see that they're hurting. Like, I see that they need to feel superior, they need to signal their virtue, they need to feel like they're in control, they need to feel like they know more than somebody else. And being able to then write that out and then send it for somebody else to be impacted by that, I think is really just a reflection of their own insecurity or their own feeling of inadequacy. However somebody behaves is exactly how they feel about themselves. If somebody's hurting you, they're also hurting themselves, or they feel hurt in some way. If somebody is trying to make you feel small and inadequate, they feel small and inadequate. The way people behave is a direct reflection of them. I suppose I've gone off topic a little bit in this particular section, but the way you're going to combat that is practicing it. The way you're going to combat that is every time you are presented with an opportunity to choose yourself and choose your experience and back your experience, you back it, especially as somebody who is historically tends to internalize other people's points of view, tends to take on other people's points of view instead of trusting themselves. Start practicing self-trust, and developing the self-trust starts with forcing yourself to trust your experience, even in the face of people questioning it, even in the face of people who are trying to minimize it. That is the biggest thing you can do to develop self-trust and stop taking things personally, because once you develop those things, you won't take things personally, because you'll realize, like I said, that the way people behave is a direct reflection of them and is often a damage control situation where they're thinking, oh my God, I don't want somebody else to think this of me. My behavior is being pulled into question. That's fucking with my idea of myself. I'm going to self-soothe here and make this person, project back onto this person their own shortcomings, how they've done something wrong, you know, deflect basically. So when you realize all of these things, you're like, oh, really, truly nothing is personal. Unless it's somebody raising an issue with you, like in an honest and kind way, it is not about you. It really is just everything to do with them. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I know it was a little bit shorter than normal, but I just really felt a strong desire to talk about this topic, especially because I've been having like quite a few comments about it on my TikTok, and I feel like my YouTube subscribers would also benefit from this conversation. So let me know what you think. Let me know your experience of taking things personally, people pleaser experience, and you know, how you've overcome taking things personally, and how, you know, measures you put in place to protect yourself and stop overthinking and stop taking things so personally. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic remainder of your day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.